Welcome to the first module of Fundamentals of Literacy, ED 6020. Tonight we're going to be talking about what is literacy in Part A. So we'll look at the definition of literacy, the components of it, and then also take a look at a balanced literacy program. In Part 2, we're going to be talking about brain-based strategies for instruction. And then in Part 3, I'm going to share with you a little bit about the tools and resources that are available for you throughout this course so that you'll know how to do the assignments. So I want to, as we get started, to make sure that you take time to look at our syllabus. It'll have information about course objectives, grading. It has all my contact information. And I just want to remind everyone that even though this is a virtual course, that I'm still available to meet with you in Zoom or an email or a phone call should you need anything from me. So like I said, tonight we're going to talk about what is literacy and kind of build our background knowledge of that. So literacy is the ability to read and view and write, to design, to speak and listen in a way that allows you to be able to communicate effectively. And the power of literacy lies not just in the ability to read or write, but rather in a person's capacity to be able to apply those skills to effectively connect, to effectively interpret and discern the intricacies of the world around them. So the changes that have happened in English language over the course of history is staggering. But when you look at the past decade to 2 decades alone, it's really, we've seen students' literacy repertoire really extend beyond more the traditional reading, comprehension, speaking, and listening to really start focusing on digital and interactive applications as well. So with today's learners, they're exposed to this myriad of traditional and also innovative skills that they have to be able to effectively navigate and decipher because of this constant stream of information that is surrounding them. So today, many children are classified as digital natives, and that just means that they're as comfortable online as they are offline. And the internet really enables them to have endless educational possibilities with constantly evolving information streams. And there's an importance of the ability to be able to sift through, to be able to interpret the material that they're being exposed to. So really strong literacy skills become this key tool that children need to use to be able to discern and interpret that information, and allows them then to be able to use those resources and this vastness of information that's at their fingertips in a way that really lives up to its full potential. So I want to show you this video that I like. It's a commercial about the power of literacy.
Evening.
Evening.
May I ring that up for you?
Yes, please.
Have a good evening.
B, C, B, C, D, E, F, G. No, not good, not good. Just the sounds that go cat, dog, calamari, trash on the beach. Good. Soft, fresh. My son and I mowed the grass. Dad, hey, Tubbs. I read your book. You read my book?
So I love that video because I think it really shows the power of literacy, that it's more than just the ability to connect to a text, which is powerful enough, but it's really about having the skills and tools so that you can connect with the world around you and with the people that you come in contact with. So I think that that does a beautiful job of explaining that. This next video really just gives you a idea of what 21st century literacy is, which is the framework for the education program that you see in schools today.
As we started this book, we knew that we couldn't just focus on reading as it's often defined. If we just think of the narrow idea of decoding a word or two words or a sentence on a page, then we're missing so much about what it means to be a literate human being in the 21st century especially. So we had to dig into what literacy really means. And those who work in early childhood have already embraced the idea that literacy has never been just about reading. It's about speaking, listening, writing, and reading. That to be a literate human being, you really need all four of those skills. So how do you build those really early in children? You do that through all sorts of modeling of the way adults use different media to speak, to write, to listen, and to read, and bring those ideas into your engagements with kids, even at very young ages. So those four pieces were certainly critical to us as we try to tackle this. But we also knew that in the 21st century, literacy has taken on, like, it just becomes a huge term. There's digital literacy, and there's media literacy, and there's the new literacy, and there's 21st century literacy. And so far, none of that's been all that well defined, right? But what underpins a lot of it is this idea that there's so much information streaming at us these days, and a lot of it's audio-visual information as well as just words on a page. And that to be able to be the real kind of critical thinkers that we need for the 21st century, children are going to have to kind of make sense of information in all forms that's coming at them. So we really tried to tackle in this book and our research moving forward literacy in a broad sense, recognizing that the basics are absolutely important and needed, and knowing how to read words on a page is very much part of it, but it really is part of it and not the whole thing, and that we have to be looking at how to help teachers and librarians and others that build their skills to help children learn this broader idea of literacy.
So there are really four main schools of thought about literacy. It can be thought of in terms of skills. It can be thought of in terms of its ability to be practiced or applied. It could be thought of as a learning process, and it can be thought of in terms of text or the subject matter. So let's break down each of those a little bit. The first one was literacy skills. So if I was looking at defining literacy in terms of skills, then it would be a tangible set of skills that involve a level of cognitive training, meaning that at certain age groups, at certain developmental stages, there's a list of skills that are components of literacy that students should be able to complete. What a kindergartner can do would be very different than the set of literacy skills for a high schooler, for example. And when you look at it in terms of skills, it's really a pathway to giving all learners access to knowledge and information. But that pathway is very defined by a set of skills and strategies. The next one was literacy applied. So that's thinking about literacy in terms of its ability to be practiced or to be put into practice through application. And so it really responds to the culture of the time. It's very application based, not just here's the skills, but what are you going to do? What are you going to be able to do with those skills? And it really comes and approaches literacy being neutral of social context. So it's applicable to everyone. And then the next thought is that literacy is a learning process. It's not a product, it's a process. And that's really born out of the constructivist theory. The constructivist theory is that we make meaning, we don't acquire meaning. So as we experience the world around us and as we have exposure to different things, our learning literacy improves and develops. And then the last one was a viewpoint that literacy is text. It has to do with subject matter. It has to do what's relevant to the learner for the purpose that they're using it for. It also involves text complexity, thinking about the types of words, the vocabulary, the connotative and denotative meanings behind words. So it's really very different branches of how you could come at and look at literacy. For our purposes, though, what I really want us to do is to look at what is probably mostly aligned with the 21st century model of literacy instruction, and that's a balanced literacy program. And you can see from this diagram that there's a lot of different components to it. So balanced literacy really came about in response to some pretty extreme teachings of either whole language on one side, which is just total immersion in real text, and then as kids need information about building skills and strategies, that's when you incorporate it. And then on the opposite side of that was the literacy approach of a phonics-based program, which is very regimented, learning things at specific times. And so in the whole language approach, literacy skills are taught in context. Phonics, they're really taught out of context. So balanced literacy approach focuses on all the different components of literacy at the same time: reading, listening, speaking, writing, presenting, and viewing, that visual literacy. And it also makes sure that within that instructional model, there is a place for shared work, there's a place for guided work, for interactive work, and then independent work throughout the teaching. When balanced literacy came along in the 1990s, the purpose was to find a better balance, thus the name balanced literacy, by mixing these two extremes. But as the years have passed, it's really come to be much more than just finding a good blend between whole language and phonics. It's really about an instructional model of literacy instruction. So when you look at balanced literacy, it's a lot more like cooking than baking. So if any of you are cooks, when you bake, everything has to be very precise. And but when you're cooking, you can have creativity and you can add different elements, a pinch of this, a smidge of that. Amounts vary. So it's not necessarily an exact science or a prescribed recipe or methodology for teaching. And lessons are really built around, here's the standard, here's the assessment data that I'm taking to be able to see where my students are performing and how they're acquiring the knowledge that we're exposing them to. And then it's really individualized to the student or to small groups of students. And the other really key component of balanced literacy is it really takes into account the best practices for gradual release in instruction. So for example, if in this particular graphic that you see in the center bar, high support, teacher support at the top, low teacher support at the bottom, and there's a gradual release of the methodology for instruction from more modeled to interactive shared to kind of guided where the teacher sits more on the side and sort of helps the students as they're doing it. And then independent is the lowest teacher support. So you see that gradual release model from other research studies that really show that that's an effective strategy for students and instruction. So the other thing I want to talk about is that balanced literacy takes into consideration this, what's called the zone of proximal development. So if you've done your education philosophies class, then you probably learned about Lev Yatsky, and he created this idea towards the end of his life. And he argued that when kids learn, when children learn, they learn by carefully watching what others are doing around them. Particularly, he was talking in terms of them watching the adults around them. And as they do this, what happens is that they slowly, more and more, little by little, take on more independence in being able to mirror the behavior or the learning that they've seen. So if you think about a child learning to walk, that's true. They look around, they see other people, they start practicing little by little by little, then they're able to do that. So children work within something referred to as their zone of proximal development to develop these skills. As children learn, then concepts slowly shift from the unknown through the zone of proximal development to the known. So learning doesn't follow a can do, can't do kind of thing. It really follows a, I can't do it in the beginning, I can do it in little pieces, and now I can do it all on my own. So if you look at this particular graphic, you see that there's sort of a comfort zone. So that's, they can do that completely on their own. Risk means that they can maybe do some of it on their own, but they may need support. And danger means I don't have any clue what I'm doing. I need that model for me. So the zone of proximal development is the area in between the known skills and the unknown skills. So in our particular graphic here, it would be that center, that risk column. That moment in time when learners can do something with help, but they can't yet do it independently. That's sort of that sweet spot for us as teachers of literacy to really find where that is for our students, because in a balanced literacy framework, we focus on this zone for the most part of our teaching. So just to kind of define them a little bit more, so that comfort zone is usually the place where students feel at ease, there's not a lot of tension, they have a good grip on the environment, they know the skills that they need, they know how to navigate through maybe some occasional rough spots, but it's a great place to retreat from the danger zone. So you may notice this if you have children or if you have been in the classroom, where you see students will pick up the same book to read over and over again. Well, one of the reasons they do that is because that's their comfort zone. They don't have to really engage and think at deeper levels or apply strategies in new ways because they're very, very comfortable in that place. The risk zone involves adapting to new circumstances, and it's kind of the most fertile place that there is for learning. It's where most people are willing to take some risks. They don't necessarily have to know everything. Sometimes they don't even feel like they need to know it all. It's where people open up to each other and they share their curiosity and their interests. And it's where they'll consider options or ideas that maybe they haven't thought of before. The opposite of that would be the danger zone. And it's generally not a good idea to work from this area either for ourselves or anyone else's. It's the area that's so full of us putting up our defenses, us being afraid of those red lights, that it requires a lot of energy and time to accomplish anything that's in that particular zone. So when you find yourself in this zone or you find your students in this zone, then it's time to start using some strategies to move them back to that risk zone. One of the ways that you can expose students to some of those danger zone activities without putting a lot of pressure on them is through teacher read alouds, because in a teacher read aloud, you're able to process text that may be at a higher level than many of them might be able to absorb and to comprehend. So it really allows for you to be able to start modeling more difficult strategies for them. So as part of the balanced literacy program, there's different components. So one is modeled reading. So that would be like the teacher read aloud. The teacher chooses the focus. So today we're going to talk about author's purpose. And then I'm going to use a text. It could just be a portion of a text. And I'm going to think aloud to model for my students what I want the reader to be thinking about if they were doing it on their own. So I'm modeling this focus strategy for several lessons. And then what I want to do is I want to move this focus into a shared reading lesson. So a shared reading lesson really starts putting more of the lesson is designed for the student to become actively engaged. So I could use, in primary grades, I could use like a large text, or maybe I have multiple copies of the same text. Maybe I have it on my screen so that they can see I've projected it. But the text that I choose, I know has the opportunity to allow students to start showing their own thinking in whatever skill that I was trying to teach them. It's a really excellent time to use really complex text for science and social studies, which can be really hard for some students, especially struggling readers. And the text really shouldn't be leveled. You're going to be providing scaffolding for students as they need that. So there could be a shared reading response. Lucy Calkins is an author who uses a lot of reading strategies and writing strategies. And she uses thinking stems to be able to engage students into starting to think and process and communicate what they're thinking. So it could be something like at the beginning of the year, you start teaching the kids through your example of saying, you know, while I was reading this book, I realized that the author was using the same word over and over again. And then I had to stop and think, why is the author doing that? Or I could say, when I was trying to figure out what the author's purpose was, I thought that she was telling it to me to encourage me that you could overcome your obstacles in life. And I'm thinking that because on page 3 it said this, or I'm wondering why the author chose to make the colors dark on this page. So in my conversations with students, as we're sharing a text together, we're communicating back and forth, and they're seeing me model, but then immediately having to apply that in their own thinking. So what are some resources that you should consider for shared text? Science and social studies textbooks, collections like through readers, things like that, primary books, passages from chapter books, articles. There's programs like ReadWorks and Tween Tribunes, Schoolworks, Poem Hunter. And then the Library of Congress also has this wide variety of primary resources that are also good for us to use. So that's just a little bit of the background of a balanced literacy program. And you can always refer back to that graphic in this presentation about all the different components of balanced literacy, because we are going to spend the next 5 weeks looking at every single one of those literacy components and then working to help us be able to learn how to apply strategies to those different components.